you here because it's almost there. 75 years, 1948, folks. You guys have no concept of what was going on in 1948.
You're just a kid.
As the guy that's almost 80 says over there. I was going to use you as an example, but I didn't know if you could stand up. Nathan Carlson, please. Okay, he's going to show. Yeah, he can stand up. And can you get back down? Dave, you still got a badge?
No, they took it away from me.
They took it away. I was going to say you could help out with collecting some of the debt, with your badge. But 1948, men were coming back from war. Women were coming back from taking jobs that they weren't allowed to have before then. It was a different time. There was a lot of strife going on. There was people all over the world were having a tough time with things. 1948, 75 years ago. That's when things got started with us. That's a legacy that you guys have now. That you can, in fact, we found today in your founder's room, where the drum set is.
Great drum set.
Yeah. There is an article from the Emerald in there talking about the beginning of Alpha Rho. If you haven't seen that, it's a fascinating story. Back then, people were experiencing these life changes that they had never had before because they're coming back from war and trying to recover from what was happening, much like a lot of people around the world are today. At that point, a lot of them were going off to college because they had to put it off. Like my father, he had to put off his going to college because he went to war. Now he's coming back. They passed the GI Bill that allowed a lot of people that couldn't have gone to college to go to college. The institution of higher education that you're at today was a teacher's college in Missouri. And they didn't allow, the Nationals didn't allow fraternities to be at teachers' colleges. So at that point, not because of that, but the school was starting to change the name to Missouri State. Not Missouri State, but Southwest Missouri State. That was a difference for them. And that allowed Nationals to come onto campuses like that. But about that time, a bunch of men came together and they formed the XYZ Club. Now these are guys that are coming back from war, and there's some high school kids that were either brothers or friends of these guys, families. And they said, we need something that we experienced in the service, some camaraderie, where we could get together and form a bond with each other. And they didn't have that at the Teacher College of Missouri. So they decided to start this XYZ Club. It was a social thing where they could have camaraderie. Then it morphed into a new thing, which we found out today, Frank, right? The Chi Upsilon Zeta Club fraternity, which is what Nationals would call local fraternities, because they weren't recognized on a national basis. It was just made up. Cuz, I should say, cuz. It was the morphing of the XYZ to this. There's another group of guys that got started with another fraternity. Well, we're not going to talk about this because they're not around anymore. 1948, they interviewed national fraternities and they chose Sigma Pi because of their ideals. They matched up what these XYZ Chi Upsilon Zeta guys thought about and felt good about. The fellowship, the brotherhood, the scholarship. Which is kind of really fascinating that these guys said, wow, that's something that we want to aspire to. 1948, they were chartered. We've got a picture of them, I think, here. Right? There they are. Oh, by the way, there's 2 days in that group there. Leo and Ralph. One of them I'm related to. The other one's from Arkansas. We're not real sure where he came from. 1948. That's the group that came from that morphing of togetherness, camaraderie, brotherhood, even scholarship. So that's how we got started, boys. That's how we got started. And we've kept this thing going for 75 years. The planks have continued. So we hope to, with your help, that can continue to go. Somehow they kept this thing going and got chartered, and they're actually, and some of us would consider it's the first fraternity at SMS, which most of us didn't understand or know at the time. Some of those guys I've even met. I'm old enough. Nate, you've met them. You've met some of them. You've met them, some of them. Some of them became quite accomplished in their field. Some of them were just everyday farmers that had great lives and families. But they're our legacy now. And you are somebody's legacy in 18 years. Kind of hard to think about. We've got a lot of stories that we've lost over the time because we've lost some people along the way. But one of those stories that I was reminded of by Larry was we had a house on National. And it was kind of visible, in front of the college. Well, Dr. Mallory, who Mike Compton remarked about, he was a pretty legendary president for SMS. He was a very proper man. He was a history professor who became president of the college. He was walking down National one day, and these gentlemen were out imbibing with some refreshments. And because it's a college and it was in the fall, he assumed that they were rather young. And so he went up to say that we are enforcing the drinking age at this institution and in this city. And the gentleman in front of that Sigma Pi house, calmly and in very kind words, I'm sure, reminded Dr. Mallory that they were veterans. They had just come back from summer activities, and some of them from actual active activities, and said, we're a little over 21 years old. We've earned this, and we will be there. That's our legacy at Sigma Pi. We stood up to whatever, and we were together with it. And unfortunately, the beer has continued along the way. Somehow there's a factor there. Yeah, there's a moral, but we're not going to go into that one tonight. That's one of the early stories, and there's so many other stories, and some of the stories that have even passed on that are a little exaggerated over the decades. They've gotten larger. Frank was taller back then. We were all better looking probably, or we didn't even know it. But we had a lot of interesting phases through the fraternity. In 1969, we moved to Elmwood, which is an apartment complex on Elm Street. And today, this is really a fascinating, one of the alumni today said his daughter is now living in an apartment on Elm Street. And he goes, and you know what it's called? Elmwood. It's the actual apartment complex. They refurbed it. And
I was supposed to live there this year, but there were roaches there, so I backed out and up to the house again.
Oh, they're still there?
Probably the same roaches.
Those roaches are 75 years old now.
I was out on that, so I'm living at the house.
Maybe the roaches follow you.
But Elmwood was a kind of a marker for the fraternity as well, because it created a lot of prestige for the institution, because it was the first of its kind, right?
Yes.
On campus.
Yes.
And some gentlemen in this room helped out with that. The Bakers, the Hefners, the Hennessy's. They earned the Grand Chapter Award that in 1972. which is the first time ever for this chapter. And it was the beginning of several others that would come a little later on. So what I'm getting at is there are people along the way that have done remarkable things. And there are people along the way that we don't know their names all the time, that we are standing on top of as we've gone through. Some of those things have occurred through a lot of the service that we have had in our phases with the fraternity. When, I think it was 1986 that we moved to the new house now that you guys are in on Elm Street, because the institution, the SMS, wanted everybody to be west of National and in a fraternity row setting. That's why you're in that house now. Well, that didn't just happen. There are alumni that actually made that happen, that created that situation. The Tom Barrs, the Nathan Carlsons, the Bob Reeds, they helped that happen. And along the way, we kind of lost our way as a fraternity. And we lost our chapter. For about, what was it, 4 years, 5 years? 5 years. We lost our chapter. But it came back. Grant, you were a part of that. That was part of what that speech was about, was bringing it back to where it was. So we've gone a long way. I do want to mention, I've talked about Tom and Nathan, but Bob Merriman was a constant in our fraternity life. Good and bad. Happy and sad. Bob served as a first counselor on the Grand Council back in the late 60s, early 70s.
60s.
60? Just 1960?
No,
I thought it was late 60s.
late 60s.
He was the first person from this chapter that became a national person with the fraternity. We also had some folks work for the fraternity as well. I think Ellis and Mike Hennessy both worked for the fraternity at one time. There's been a couple others along the way. But that created a legacy that we kind of built on going as we got better as a chapter. As we achieved better as a chapter. We created more goals as a chapter, which made us actually better actives and better people along the way. We actually had a fraternity next to us at Elmwood that I don't think exists anymore on campus.
Yay.
Yeah. They were terrible. And they knew it. And they could see what we were doing over there. They even did a few things to us a couple of times, I think, that we won't go into right now. But the reason for their not existence is because they didn't care. So that's part of the process of 75 years. You go through phases of things and you go through ups and downs. But it turned around. In the 80s, we actually had about 4 Grand Chapter Awards along the way. And that took a lot of effort by a lot of guys that were active at that point, and some of the alumni that helped out with that as well. Then we kind of went down a little bit. Then it came back. And in 2014, we became another chapter again. We were rechartered. That group went on to win the Grand Chapter Award, or actually Grand Sage Award, in 16 and 18. So you've got a history of accomplishment as a chapter. And that's a challenge to you, to get back to that level, to get off of your suspensions or probations, and get back at it. I had the privilege to be on the Grand Council for a few years and become Grand Sage. And it was my privilege to give out some of those awards. And you could see it in the eyes of the guys that won those awards. It's quite an achievement at a convocation. So I encourage you to do that. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of sadness at times. but it's a lot of accomplishment as well. So hopefully, for the next 25 years, to our 100th anniversary, and I hope some of you are still there for that. Some of us will not be, probably. But I hope for the next 25 years, you work at it and you pay back to that fraternity that maybe helped you along the way somewhere. You pay back to that guy that was your friend that now is your brother. You pay back to those guys that are 18 years away and help them along the way. So congratulations on 75 years, gentlemen. It's truly quite an accomplishment. We've got several in Sigma Pi on a national basis, but we are in a very small group. So congratulations.